It's funny, the things you choose to ignore when you're in love. You see the little cracks in the porcelain, the tiny, almost imperceptible flaws in the masterpiece, but you tell yourself they're just quirks. You convince yourself they add character, that they're part of what makes it so uniquely beautiful. But a crack is a crack. And eventually, with enough pressure, the entire beautiful, fragile thing shatters in your hands, and you're left standing there, wondering how you never realized you were holding a cheap imitation all along. For me, that masterpiece was Leo, and not just Leo, but his entire glittering world. I'm Winifred. My field is art history, specifically the murky, fascinating world of provenance, the life story of an object. I can look at a 17th century Dutch landscape and tell you not just who painted it, but whose walls it hung on, whose hands it passed through, whose lives it silently witnessed. It's my passion, it's my language, and I thought, for a blissful 18 months, that it was Leo's language too. I met him at a symposium in Florence. He was an archaeologist, or so he said. He had this wild, passionate energy, eyes that lit up when he talked about unearthing forgotten cities, and a smile that could disarm a cynic at 20 paces. He wasn't just smart, he was intoxicating. He spoke 5 languages, had dirt under his fingernails from a dig in Anatolia, and could talk about the chemical composition of Roman concrete with the same fervor he used to order a bottle of wine. I was, from the moment he quoted Ovid to me over espresso, completely and utterly gone. And then I met his family. They were the sun to his brilliant moon. His father, Caspian, was a towering figure with a silver mane and a voice like warm gravel, a renowned historian who seemed to have a personal anecdote about every major archaeological site on the planet. His mother, Serafina, was elegant and sharp, a former museum curator who moved through the world with an effortless grace, and his younger sister, Elara, was the quiet, artistic soul, a budding conservator with a gentle touch and an encyclopedic knowledge of pigments. They called themselves recovery specialists. It was a term Caspian had coined. They worked with prestigious museums and private foundations, they explained, to repatriate artifacts that had been lost to the chaos of history, stolen during wars, sold on the black market, or hidden away in the vaults of stubborn collectors. They were academic adventurers, a family of modern-day Indiana Joneses with better tailoring, and they welcomed me, Winifred, the slightly nerdy provenance expert from a quiet university, into their inner circle with open arms. I wasn't just Leo's girlfriend, I was their new secret weapon. They groomed me, celebrated my expertise, made me feel like the missing piece of their brilliant, dynamic puzzle. Our next project was the big one, the Everest of lost collections, the Duplessis collection, a stunning assembly of pre-revolutionary French art, jewelry, and documents believed to have vanished in 1940. Caspian had found it. Through his unimpeachable sources, he'd located it in the private, high-security vault of a notoriously reclusive tech billionaire named Kalin, hidden away in a modern fortress in the Swiss Alps. The mission was simple. Kalin was holding the collection illegally, and their foundation had secured the right to recover it for the Louvre. My job was to be the in-house expert, to ensure every single piece was authentic upon recovery. I spent months studying the original manifests, memorizing the descriptions of every snuff box, every locket, every brushstroke on the lost Fragonard. I was living a dream. The twist, the moment the porcelain shattered, didn't come with a bang. It came with a whisper. In the quiet of my study in the family's sprawling villa overlooking Lake Geneva. To prepare me for the real thing, Leo had brought me a test subject, a near-perfect forgery of a small painting from the collection, a portrait miniature by Elizabeth Vigée-Lebrun. It was a practice run for my authentication skills. It was breathtaking. The craquelure was perfect, the ivory canvas aged just so, but as I held it under the specialized light of my desk lamp, my heart began to pound a slow, sick rhythm against my ribs. There was something wrong, a tiny, insignificant detail that only a specialist obsessed with 18th century materials would ever notice. The cobalt blue in the subject's sash. It was just a little too uniform, a little too pure. The authentic pigment from that era, smalt, had microscopic, irregular silica inclusions. This was modern, perfectly synthesized ultramarine, a tiny, impossible anachronism, a single, wrong note in an otherwise perfect symphony. I thought it was a mistake, a flaw in the forger's work. I mentioned it to Leo, laughing it off. Look how good I am. I can even spot a mistake in your flawless fake. But he didn't laugh. For a fraction of a second, a shadow passed over his face. A flicker of something cold and sharp, an expression I had never seen before. Then the charming smile was back. He kissed my forehead and called me brilliant. He said that's why I was their expert, to catch exactly those kinds of details. His explanation was smooth, plausible, but the cold feeling didn't leave me. It coiled in my stomach and stayed there. The next day, I told Leo I needed to go into Geneva for some research materials. I just needed some air, some distance to think. I sat in a small cafe, staring into a cup of coffee I couldn't drink, the impossible cobalt-blue burning in my mind. What if it wasn't a mistake? What if the point wasn't to spot the forgery? What if the point was to perfect it? A man sat down at my table without asking. He was ordinary looking, in a crisp but unremarkable suit. He didn't look at me, just at the sugar dispenser on the table. He spoke in quiet, unaccented English. My name is Marcus Thorne. I believe you're working with the de Villiers family. My blood ran cold. I almost bolted. The name they used, de Villiers, was the one they presented to the world. It was a name synonymous with academic prestige. He continued, his voice low and calm. We know about the Duplessis collection. We also know there is no foundation. There is no recovery mission. The Louvre has no idea who they are. They are not recovering lost artifacts, Winifred. They are replacing them. He slid a slim tablet across the table. On the screen was a picture of the Vouget-Lebrun miniature from my desk. Next to it was another image, identical in every way, except a small section of the blue sash was circled in red. Underneath it, a spectrographic analysis report. The header on the report read, Interpol. The world tilted on its axis. He knew about the blue. The man, Marcus, finally looked at me. His eyes were not unkind, but they were incredibly weary, like he'd seen every lie the world had to offer. The reclusive Mr. Kalin, he said, has been on our payroll for 2 years. The vault is a stage. A very, very expensive stage. We have been hunting Caspian de Villiers for a decade. He and his family are responsible for the disappearance of over 200 million euros worth of art. They don't just steal it, they swap it with perfect forgeries, leaving the owners and the world none the wiser for years. They are the most successful, most elusive family of art thieves on the planet. And you, their brilliant in-house expert, are about to help them walk into our trap. I couldn't breathe. The air in the cafe felt thick and heavy like water. Every memory of the last 18 months began to curdle. Caspian's praise, Seraphina's warmth, Leo's love. It was all a lie, a beautifully constructed, expertly crafted, perfect forgery. Marcus leaned in slightly. His voice dropped even lower. Caspian is a ghost. We can never get close enough. But you are already inside. You are in their home, at their table. You are in their son's bed. They trust you. I'm not asking you to be a witness, Winifred. I'm asking you to be an informant. Help me, and we can end this. Refuse, and when we take them down, you'll go down with them as a willing accomplice. The choice, he said, pushing the tablet back towards him, is yours. And just like that, the man who had demolished my entire world stood up, left a 20-franc note on the table, and walked out of the cafe, leaving me alone with the ruins. Returning to the villa was the hardest thing I have ever done. The familiar scent of lemon polish and old books in the grand hallway now smelled like a tomb. Every painting on the wall, every sculpture in the garden felt like a taunt, a piece of stolen history mocking me. Seraphina greeted me with a warm smile, asking if I'd had a productive day. I felt a wave of nausea. Her maternal affection, which I had craved and cherished, now felt like the cloying sweetness of poison. I managed a weak smile and told her I'd found just the book I needed, a lie. It was the first of many. That night, Leo came to my room. He was so handsome, so full of life, his skin still warm from the evening sun. He wrapped his arms around me from behind as I stood staring out the window at the placid, dark surface of the lake. He murmured into my hair about our future, about this one last great recovery, and how, after this, we could do anything, go anywhere. He was building our future on a foundation of lies, and I had to stand there and pretend to be his partner in it. It was a performance. My entire life had become a performance. My heart felt like a cold, heavy stone in my chest. He mistook my silence for contemplation, my rigidity for fatigue. He kissed my neck, completely oblivious to the war raging inside me. I felt like a ghost in my own body. The betrayal was so profound, so absolute. It was almost sublime in its cruelty. It wasn't just that they were criminals. It was that they had seen my greatest strength, my expertise, my passion, and twisted it into a tool for their own greed. They hadn't just used me, they had desecrated the one thing I held sacred. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I was plunged into a dizzying slideshow of memories, each one now recontextualized and stained with deceit. I remembered my first meeting with Leo, so clearly, so painfully. It was at the Uffizi Gallery during a symposium on Renaissance patronage. I was delivering a paper on the Medici banking family's influence on Florentine art. I was nervous, a nobody academic in a room of giants. During the Q&A, a man with impossibly bright eyes and an easy smile stood up. He didn't just ask a question, he engaged in a debate, challenging my thesis with a counter-argument so brilliant and well-articulated that the entire room was captivated. That was Leo. He'd cornered me afterwards, not with arrogance, but with infectious enthusiasm. He told me he'd never heard anyone speak about provenance with such passion. He made me feel seen. He made me feel brilliant. Now, I realize he wasn't captivated by my intellect. He was auditioning it. Then came the memories of meeting the family at their villa. It was a whirlwind. Caspian had listened to my story, a quiet academic life. Parents who were kind but unimpressed by my dusty old books with what I thought was deep paternal empathy. He had put a hand on my shoulder and said, "A mind like yours doesn't belong in a dusty library, Winifred. It belongs in the world, touching history." It was the validation I had secretly yearned for my entire life. Serafina had taken me through their private collection, or what I now knew was their gallery of stolen goods, and praised my insights. Alara, quiet and observant, had followed us, and we'd bonded over a shared love for the delicate work of restoring damaged canvases. They weren't just a family. They were the embodiment of the life I'd always dreamed of, a life of purpose, adventure, and beauty. They had studied me, found my deepest insecurities and desires, and built a perfect cage for me out of them. I remembered the red flags, the little dissonant notes I had so willfully ignored. There was the time Caspian had boasted about getting a delicate Etruscan vase through customs in Naples by marking the crate as terracotta plumbing supplies. I'd laughed, thinking it was just a funny story of outsmarting bureaucracy. There was the constant casual talk of private shipping channels and discreet clients. I had chalked it up to the eccentricities of the ultra-wealthy academic world, a world I didn't understand. And most damningly, there was their complete lack of a published paper trail. For a family of such esteemed academics, they had never published a single peer-reviewed article, not one. When I'd asked Leo about it, he'd smiled that disarming smile and said, "We're practitioners, my love, not theorists. We don't write about history, we rescue it." It was such a romantic, compelling notion. It was also a perfect lie. My grief was a physical thing. It was a hollow ache in my bones, a tightness in my throat that made it hard to breathe. I had loved them, I had trusted them with a totality that now seemed criminally naive. I looked at myself in the mirror and I barely recognized the woman staring back. Who was she? A fool? An accomplice? This was my low point, the absolute nadir of my life, standing in a gilded cage, surrounded by thieves who thought I was one of them. The love I felt for Leo curdled into something bitter and cold. It was the love you feel for a ghost, for a person who never truly existed. 2 days later, I got the summons, an encrypted text from a burner phone Marcus had instructed me to buy, a time and a place, a public library in Lausanne. I found him in the history section, browsing a book on medieval siege weapons. He didn't acknowledge me at first. We stood in silence for a full minute, the air thick with the smell of old paper and my own fear. Finally, he closed the book and turned to me. "Have you made a decision?" he asked, his voice neutral. I couldn't speak, so I just nodded. "Good," he said, "because this is bigger than you think." He led me to a private study room in the back. He opened his briefcase and laid out a series of files on the table. They weren't just about stolen art, they were about the consequences. There was a photo of a small museum curator in Lisbon, a man who had been professionally ruined and driven to bankruptcy after the prize of his collection, authenticated by a de Villiers associate, was revealed as a fake 5 years later. There was a report on an elderly couple in Argentina who had sold their family's masterpiece, a painting that had been in their family for 200 years, to what they thought was a legitimate foundation represented by Serafina. They had used the money for their grandchildren's education, only for the painting to vanish, replaced by a forgery in a museum in Madrid. The family was now embroiled in a legal nightmare, accused of fraud. "They don't just steal objects, Winifred," Marcus said, his voice hard. "They sever the connection between people and their history. They poison the well of trust that the entire art world is built on. They destroy legacies, reputations, lives. They are a cancer." He let that sink in. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was arming me. He was showing me that this was not just about my own personal betrayal. It was about justice on a scale I couldn't have imagined. This was the catalyst, the moment my despair and my grief began to burn away, leaving something else in its place. It was cold and hard and clear. It was resolve. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, and my voice was steady. For the first time in days, it sounded like my own. Marcus looked at me, a flicker of something, respect perhaps, in his tired eyes. "I need you to go back there and be the brilliant art historian they think you are. I need you to help them plan the perfect heist, and I need you to give me every single detail." A thought, cold and sharp, surfaced in my mind as I looked at the files of the lives they had ruined. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at Leo for breaking my heart. But then I looked at the face of the disgraced curator from Lisbon, a man with kind eyes and a defeated slump to his shoulders, and I knew I was lying to myself. Maybe it wasn't about revenge before, but it was now. And so my new life began, a life of quiet, meticulous deception. I was a double agent, living in the heart of the enemy's camp, and my cover was the very expertise they sought to exploit. My meetings with Marcus were clandestine and nerve-wracking. We never met in the same place twice. Sometimes it was a bench in a bustling city park, other times a quiet corner of a vast impersonal train station. We communicated in code, using dead drops and encrypted messaging apps that he had taught me how to use. I would photograph documents with a specialized pen camera, upload them to a secure server, and then wipe the device. I became a spy. The initial information I provided was a goldmine for Interpol. I gave them the family's entire operational structure. Caspian was the mastermind, the strategist. Serafina was the front, the social engineer who could charm her way into any gallery or auction house. Leo was the field operative, the charismatic face of their missions. And Alara was their in-house restorer and increasingly a junior forger. But the real genius behind their fakes, I learned, was a man named Julian. He was a disgraced art prodigy, a brilliant painter who had been caught selling his own undiscovered Vermeer to a gallery in Amsterdam. His career was ruined, but his talent was undeniable. Caspian had found him, given him a new life and a new purpose, and now Julian worked exclusively for them, out of a hidden studio in the villa's old wine cellar. This became the focus of my first subplot, my first real move against them. I needed to know more about Julian's methods. I began spending time in the studio, under the guise of wanting to better understand the forgeries to anticipate the authentication process. Julian was a nervous, bird-like man, constantly twitching, terrified of Caspian but fiercely proud of his own work. He saw me as a kindred spirit, someone who appreciated the technical artistry of what he did. I praised his work, his mastery of chemical aging, his flawless brushwork. And in doing so, I made a discovery that would become our ace in the hole. Julian, in his obsessive quest for perfection, had a secret: to ensure his forgeries would last for centuries without degrading a point of artistic pride for him. He mixed a tiny, synthetic polymer into his linseed oil binder. It was a modern compound, completely undetectable to all but the most advanced gas chromatography analysis. It was his signature, his secret mark of genius. He confessed this to me one late night, his voice thick with wine and vanity. "They will think it is a masterpiece for 500 years," he whispered, a manic gleam in his eye. I felt a chill run down my spine. I reported this to Marcus immediately. It was the smoking gun. Now Interpol wouldn't just be able to tell the fakes from the real artifacts. They could definitively prove they were all created recently, by the same hand. My other target was Alara. This was harder. My affection for her was genuine, and I could see the toll the family business was taking on her. She loved art, truly loved it. While Caspian and Serafina saw a Degas sculpture as a commodity worth 3 million euros, Alara saw the movement, the life, the artist's struggle captured in the bronze. The cynicism of her family was slowly poisoning that pure love, and it was painful to watch. I started a campaign of quiet subversion. We would be in the gardens, and I'd talk about the letters I'd read from artists, about their poverty, their sacrifices, how their art was the only thing they had. "Can you imagine," I'd say, looking at a stolen Rodin sketch, "what he would think, knowing this piece was being used to trick someone?" I was planting seeds of doubt, appealing to the part of her that I knew was still pure. I'd point out the beauty of a piece in a public museum we visited, remarking on how wonderful it was that anyone, a student, or a tourist, or a child, could come and see it for free. "This is what it's for, isn't it?" I'd say gently, "to be shared." She would just nod, a troubled look in her eyes. I wasn't trying to recruit her, not yet. I was trying to give her a conscience, a lifeboat she could cling to when the ship went down. It was a dangerous game. If she mentioned my strange comments to Caspian, I would be finished. But I saw in her a reflection of the person I used to be, and I felt I owed her a chance. Meanwhile, the planning for the Duplessis heist continued, and I was at the center of it. Using the detailed and strategically altered schematics of the vault that Marcus had provided me, I became an invaluable asset to Caspian. The family would gather in Caspian's study, a room paneled in dark wood and smelling of leather and cigar smoke. They would project the vault blueprints onto a large screen, and I, with my insider knowledge from Interpol, would point out their flaws and offer solutions. "This motion sensor here," Caspian would say, pointing with a laser pen, "is a standard thermal imaging model. We can bypass it with a nitrogen burst to cool the air." "No," I would interject, my voice calm and authoritative. "My sources say Kalen just upgraded it. It's a newer microwave-based sensor. A nitrogen burst will do nothing but trigger a silent alarm. However," I'd say, leaning forward, "the sensor has a blind spot, a very small one, here, behind this support column. If you approach from this angle, it will never see you." Of course, the blind spot wasn't a blind spot at all. It was the focal point of a high-resolution camera Marcus's team had installed weeks ago. I was methodically, piece by piece, building their prison and handing them the keys. I redirected their path away from the real emergency exits and towards reinforced corridors with magnetic locks that could be triggered remotely. I advised them on which security panels to disable, knowing that disabling them would actually trigger a data transfer directly to an Interpol server. I was their trusted expert, their brilliant strategist, and every piece of advice I gave them was another nail in their coffin. Leo watched me during these meetings with open adoration. He saw my confidence, my command of the details, and mistook it for ambition. He thought I was finally becoming one of them. "You're a natural, Winifred," he'd whisper to me later. "You have ice in your veins." I always knew it. It was meant as the highest compliment. It made my skin crawl. He was falling in love not with me, but with the character I was playing, a colder, more ruthless version of myself. And the most terrifying part was that, sometimes, I wasn't sure where the performance ended and I began. The pressure of my dual existence was immense. I was in a constant state of high alert, analyzing every word, Every glance, every silence. My sleep was filled with anxiety dreams where I would mix up my lies, accidentally calling Leo Marcus or talking about Interpol's surveillance in a planning session. I lived on a knife's edge, and the only thing that kept me sane was the methodical nature of my secret work. The small, concrete acts of betrayal, a photographed page, a whispered conversation with Alara, a piece of deliberate misinformation for Caspian, were my anchors in a sea of deceit. I was no longer just a victim. I was the architect of their downfall, and with every blueprint I annotated and every lie I told, the cold, hard knot of resolve in my gut tightened. The day of reckoning was coming, and I was the one setting the date. The silent takeover began to manifest in the real world. Marcus's team, acting on my intelligence, started to gently squeeze the de Villiers family. It was subtle at first, a series of frustrating but seemingly random mishaps. A specialized cutting tool they had ordered from a black market contact in Antwerp was unexpectedly seized by Belgian customs in a routine inspection. A set of fake identification documents they had procured for the heist team were delivered with glaring, amateurish errors, rendering them useless. Caspian was furious, ranting about the declining quality of criminal services. He spent hours on encrypted calls, yelling at his contacts, never once suspecting the problem was not external, but internal. The most significant blow came when a safe house they had maintained for years in a village near the Swiss border was suddenly raided by local police for a supposed tax violation. The place was clean, of course. Caspian was far too meticulous to leave evidence lying around, but the raid spooked their caretaker and compromised the location for future use. I sat in the living room, calmly sipping tea and feigning sympathy as Serafina lamented their string of bad luck. "It's like the whole world is conspiring against us," she said, her usual composure frayed at the edges. I just nodded. Yes, I thought. It is. This growing atmosphere of panic and frustration was my shield. With the family distracted by these external problems, my own strange behavior went largely unnoticed. My late-night research sessions, my quiet conversations with Alara, my sudden encyclopedic knowledge of high-tech security systems, it was all accepted as part of my dedication to the mission. I was becoming indispensable, the calm center in their growing storm. The true test of my control came from Leo. He was more observant than his parents, less blinded by arrogance. He noticed the subtle shift in me. He saw the new hardness in my eyes, the way I no longer deferred to Caspian in the planning sessions, but stated my opinions as fact, and he was enthralled by it. But he also sensed a new distance in me, a part of me that was held back, walled off. One evening, he cornered me in the library. He came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, pulling me against him. He was trying to be intimate, but it felt like an interrogation. "You've changed, Winifred," he murmured into my ear. "This whole business, it's unlocked something in you, something powerful." I kept my body still, my breathing even. "I'm just trying to make sure we all get through this," I said, my voice a perfect imitation of cool professionalism. "I know," he said, his grip tightening slightly. "But what happens after? When this is all over?" He turned me around to face him. His eyes were searching mine, looking for a crack in the facade. "Is this what you want? A life of looking over your shoulder? Of living in the shadows?" It was a test, a loyalty test. He was gauging my commitment, not just to the heist, but to the life. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I met his gaze without flinching. "The only thing I want, Leo," I said, putting a hand on his cheek, "is a life with you, away from all of this. Once the Duplessis collection is secure, we'll have enough to disappear. We can be anyone, anywhere, just you and me. No more shadows." It was the perfect answer, because it was the lie he desperately wanted to believe. He saw the reflection of his own desires in my eyes, and was satisfied. He kissed me, a deep, passionate kiss full of relief. I kissed him back, forcing myself to respond, to play the part of the devoted lover, while a part of my mind remained cold and detached, a silent observer watching a scene from a play. That was the moment I truly understood the power I now held. I wasn't just deceiving them, I was manipulating their deepest hopes and fears. I was using their own methods against them. The pressure, however, was having a profound effect on Alara. My quiet campaign of conscience was working, but it was also making her increasingly unstable. The family's escalating stress, combined with my subtle provocations, was pushing her to a breaking point. One afternoon, I found her in the restoration studio, not working, but just sitting and staring at a half-finished forgery of a small Renoir. There were tears streaming down her face. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and desperation. "I can't do this anymore, Winifred," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I hate it. I hate the lying. I hate what we do." She gestured at the canvas. "This feels dirty. It feels like a violation." This was it, the moment I had been working towards, the moment that could either solidify my plan or expose me completely. I took a massive risk. I walked over and sat beside her, taking her hand. Her fingers were ice cold. I didn't offer empty platitudes. I offered her a sliver of the truth. "I know, Alara," I said softly. "It is a violation, and you're not like them. You never have been." Her head snapped up, her eyes searching mine. "What do you mean?" "Your father, your mother, even Leo, they see the price tag. You see the soul," I said. "There's a difference, and you have to decide which side you're on before it's too late to choose." It was a dangerous, ambiguous statement, but she understood the unspoken warning. I was offering her an out, a separate path. I told her about a fellowship for art conservators in Vienna, a legitimate one that I knew she was qualified for. I told her the application was due in a month. I was planting the idea of a future, a different life, a lifeboat. "Sometimes," I said, echoing my earlier words to her, "the bravest thing you can do is leave the ship before it hits the iceberg." She didn't say anything. She just stared at me, the tears drying on her cheeks, a new, terrifying understanding dawning in her eyes. I had just armed a volatile, emotionally distraught person with a piece of knowledge that could destroy me, but I also knew it was my only chance to save her. The family was a monolith, a single entity. My goal was no longer just to destroy them, but to see if I could fracture them first, to see if a single piece of a shattered forgery could be saved. The final days leading up to the heist were a blur of intense, focused activity. The atmosphere in the villa was electric, a toxic cocktail of greed, anticipation, and frayed nerves. Caspian, a coiled spring of tension, barked orders. Serafina moved through the chaos with a brittle, icy calm. And Leo was watching me. The seeds of doubt, once quieted, had begun to sprout again. He couldn't put his finger on what was wrong, but my perfect composure in the face of his family's panic was, in itself, a source of suspicion. The counter-manipulation came 2 nights before the operation. He drew me out onto the terrace, away from the prying ears of his parents. The moon was a perfect silver disk over the dark lake. It was a scene of breathtaking romance, and it was entirely staged. He took both of my hands in his. "Winifred," he began, his voice low and sincere, the voice I had first fallen in love with. "I've been thinking about what you said, about us leaving." I held my breath. "Yes?" "I don't want to wait," he said, his gaze intense. "Let's leave, now, tonight. Forget the Duplessis collection. Forget my family. We have enough money squirreled away. We can be on a plane to Bali by sunrise. Just you and me. We can start over, for real this time." It was a brilliant, desperate move, a final, ultimate loyalty test. If I was truly the woman he thought I was, the woman in love and hungry for a new life, I would say yes. I would leap at the chance to escape. If I hesitated, if I insisted on going through with the heist, it would prove I had another agenda. My entire plan, months of work, hinged on this single moment. My heart felt like it was going to beat its way out of my chest. I looked into his eyes, the eyes of the man I had once loved with my entire being, and I saw the ghost of that man, the beautiful lie he had sold me. And I used it against him. I let a tear slip down my cheek. "Oh, Leo," I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. "You don't know how much I want to say yes." I pulled my hands away and wrapped my arms around myself, a perfect picture of inner conflict. "But think about it. If we run now, your father will never forgive us. We'll be looking over our shoulders for the rest of our lives, not from the law, but from him. This is our one chance to get out clean, to have enough so that we are truly free, even from them. I looked up at him, my eyes pleading. 2 more days, Leo. That's all I'm asking. 2 more days, and then we are free forever. Please, for us. I had turned his own logic against him. I had painted a picture of a future so compelling, so aligned with his own selfish desires, that he had no choice but to believe it. I saw the conflict in his eyes resolve, replaced by a grudging admiration. He pulled me into his arms, and I could feel the tension leave his body. "You're right," he said, his voice thick with relief. "You're always right. You're stronger than any of us." I had passed the test. The last obstacle was cleared, but as I stood there in his embrace, feigning relief, I felt a profound and bitter emptiness. The power I held was a lonely, corrosive thing. The family exodus I had been hoping for hadn't happened. Elara had grown quiet and withdrawn, her face a pale, unreadable mask. I didn't know if I had saved her or just terrified her into silence. The dice were thrown. All that was left was to watch them land. Heist night. The air in the Swiss Alps was thin and bitingly cold. Kalen's fortress was a marvel of modern architecture, a stark composition of glass and black steel clinging to a mountainside. It looked impenetrable. From our mobile command van, parked in a wooded area a kilometer away, it looked like a sleeping beast. Inside the van, it was a different world. Banks of monitors glowed, displaying schematics, security feeds, and biometric readings. The tension was so thick I could taste it, metallic and sharp, like blood. I was at the central console, headset on, a map of the vault's interior lit up before me. Serafina was beside me, her knuckles white as she gripped a silver pen. She was the mission commander, but I was the navigator. My voice was the only one Leo and Caspian would hear in their earpieces as they moved through the silent, climate-controlled corridors of the vault. "Okay, Leo, you're approaching the first pressure-sensitive corridor," I said, my voice unnaturally calm. "Remember what I told you. The weight calibration is keyed to a single person under 90 kilos. Caspian, you wait here. Leo, proceed. Keep your steps light and centered on the tiles I marked." I watched on a monitor as Leo's green heat signature moved cautiously across the floor. He was following my instructions to the letter, moving through the exact path I had designed for him, a path that kept him in constant view of Marcus's hidden cameras. "Good," I said as he reached the other side. "Now, the laser grid. It's an oscillating sequence, timed to the ventilation system. You have a 7-second window when the vent cycles on. I'll count you in." It was a masterful performance. I guided them through layers of security, each instruction a perfect blend of truth and misdirection. I led them around traps of their own imagining while walking them directly into ours. They were so convinced of their own brilliance, of my brilliance, that they never questioned a thing. They were a team of master thieves, and they were moving like puppets on my strings. Finally, they reached the main chamber, the heart of the vault, the Duplessis collection. It was beautifully lit, each piece displayed with reverence. On my monitor, I saw Leo let out a low whistle. Caspian simply grunted, a sound of pure avarice. They had no appreciation for the history, for the beauty. They only saw the payload. "The authentication cases are on the left," I instructed. "You have 17 minutes before the humidity sensors reset. Start the swap." The next few minutes were a study in brutal efficiency. They moved with a practiced, callous speed, lifting priceless artifacts from their velvet rests and replacing them with Julian's perfect forgeries. A diamond-encrusted locket that had belonged to Marie Antoinette was handled with the same care as a bag of groceries. A delicate, hand-painted fan was tossed into a padded crate. They weren't rescuing history, they were ransacking it. And in their cold, professional desecration, any last lingering speck of pity I might have felt for them evaporated. "Swap complete on the jewelry." Leo's voice crackled in my ear, moving to the Fragonard. 6 minutes left, I said, my voice level. They carefully removed the masterpiece from its frame and replaced it with the fake. It was the last piece. "We're done." Caspian said, his voice tight with triumph. All items secured, we're clear. Yes, you are, I said into the microphone, and then I reached down and pressed a single red button on my console. In the vault, it happened instantly. The main door, a 2-ton slab of reinforced steel, slammed shut with a deafening, final boom. Every light in the chamber switched to a brilliant, unforgiving white, and from concealed panels in the walls, a dozen figures in black tactical gear emerged, weapons raised. Marcus Thorne stood in the center of them, his arms crossed, his face grim. In the van, Seraphina's head whipped around, her face a mask of confusion. What was that? What's happening? On the comms, Leo's voice was a panicked squawk. Winifred, what's going on? The door is sealed. We're trapped. Talk to me. I slowly took off my headset and placed it on the console. I turned to look at Seraphina. Her eyes, which had always held a mixture of cunning and maternal warmth, were now wide with dawning horror. She looked from my face to the monitors, where she could see her husband and son surrounded, hands in the air. She saw Marcus Thorne speaking into a radio, and then her eyes came back to me, to my calm, quiet face, and she understood. You, she hissed, her voice a venomous whisper. It was you. She lunged at me, her fingers crooked into claws, a strangled scream of fury tearing from her throat. But two of Marcus's agents, who had been silently waiting outside the van, stepped in and restrained her easily. She fought like a wild animal, her elegant facade stripped away to reveal the feral creature beneath. The van door slid open, and the cold mountain air rushed in. I stepped out, leaving the chaos behind me. I could still hear Leo's voice, a desperate, broken sound from the discarded headset, repeating my name over and over again. Winifred. Winifred, Winifred, like a prayer, like a curse. I walked a few paces away and stood looking at the fortress, now bathed in the flashing blue and red lights of police vehicles. My part was over. I saw Marcus emerge from the main entrance. He walked towards me, his face tired but satisfied. He gave a single brief nod. It was all the confirmation I needed. The new reality had begun. The de Villiers family, the untouchable ghosts of the art world, were finished. And I, their final, most perfect creation, was finally free. 6 months later, the air in the Musée d'Orsay doesn't smell like a tomb. It smells of history, of reverence, of shared human experience. It smells like home. The Grand Hall is buzzing with the excited chatter of journalists, academics, and art lovers. They're all here for the grand unveiling of the Duplessis collection, returned to the people of France after 80 years in the dark. At the front of the room, on a small stage, a banner hangs. It reads, "Curated by Winifred Hayes," my real name, a name I feel like I'm hearing for the first time. The trial was swift. Faced with the mountain of evidence I had provided, Julian's confession about his secret polymer, and the irrefutable fact they were caught red-handed in a meticulously documented sting operation, the de Villiers family had no defense. Caspian and Seraphina received sentences that will ensure they spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Their network of contacts was dismantled, their hidden accounts seized, and a dozen other high-profile art thefts were finally solved. They weren't just a family, they were a syndicate with a shared last name, and their empire had crumbled to dust. Leo, facing his own long sentence, tried one last, desperate manipulation. He tried to claim I was the true mastermind, that I had seduced him and orchestrated the whole thing out of ambition. But no one believed him. My testimony, backed by Marcus's evidence, painted a clear picture of a young woman groomed, deceived, and ultimately pushed to an extreme act of self-preservation. In the end, his accusations just made him look pathetic. I saw him one last time in the courtroom, his charm gone, replaced by a hollow, bitter rage. He was just a common thief in an expensive suit. The masterpiece had been a fake all along. As I stand by the podium, waiting to give my opening remarks, I scan the crowd, and I see her, standing near the back, looking small and anonymous in a simple gray coat, is Alara. She had taken the deal. Faced with the choice I had given her, she had found her lifeboat, Her testimony against her family, corroborating everything I had revealed, had earned her a drastically reduced sentence, probation, and community service. She was free, in a way. She met my eyes across the crowded room. There was no animosity in her gaze, only a deep, weary sadness. She gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod, a nod of understanding, of thanks, of goodbye. I nodded back. I had saved one piece from the wreckage. It wasn't everything, but it was something. I step up to the microphone and a hush falls over the room. I look out at the faces, and then past them, to the art itself, to the real Fragonard, the real Vigée Lebrun. They are home, they are safe, they are where they belong. The narrator's voice becomes more direct, as if speaking to a friend, to you. It's a strange thing to have your world burn down and to be the one holding the match. For a long time, I was consumed by the betrayal. The fact that the love I thought was the anchor of my life was actually the chain holding me down. I thought taking them down was about revenge. And maybe in the beginning it was. It wasn't about revenge until it was. But standing here, in this beautiful hall, surrounded by this art that I helped save, I realize it was about something more. It was about reclamation. They tried to turn my passion into a weapon, my knowledge into a tool for their greed. But in the end, that was their mistake. They handed me the very thing I needed to dismantle them from the inside. They didn't understand that the true value of these things isn't monetary. It's the story they tell, the provenance. And I was the one who knew their story better than anyone. I just had to decide how it was going to end. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones who build the most beautiful cages. They tell you it's a castle, a palace built to keep you safe, and you believe them because the view from the window is so lovely. But a cage is still a cage, and freedom isn't about finding a bigger cage. It's about realizing you have the strength to break the bars, even if it means flying away alone. It's terrifying, but trust me, the silence of being on your own is so much better than the noise of a lie. You have to save yourself. No one else is going to do it for you. The gentle ambient underscore swells slightly. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt taken for granted or betrayed by those you trusted, I hope my journey gives you a little bit of strength. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to make a difficult choice to reclaim your own life. I read every single one, and if you enjoyed this, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding justice in the most unexpected ways. It really does help. Thank you again for being here with me today.